every group, every tribe, every flock, every gathering, every team has what we would call a natural predator. Now, maybe you've got a small organization, 5 or 6 employees, but you've got one that's really, really super talented. That one super talented person will be scalped or headhunted by other companies. They want to take your talent, especially if you're a competitive threat. If they feel like we can take that one person from their team and move them to our team, they're coming after them. But they also realize that maybe you've got that one person on your team who's more likely to give up sensitive information. They're also a vulnerability or a threat. And so every company, every team, every organization, every tribe, every flock has natural predators. The question is, do you know what a Jenny is? Think of herd terms or farming terms, and do you have one? I'm going to encourage you as leaders to consider that idea today. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. The idea of a Jenny, I think first came to my mind when I was in my early teens. My mom used to watch them when we would do things out around the countryside where I grew up in Lampasas, Texas, the middle of nowhere. But several of the little communities around us were either livestock communities, because the big cattle barn, the Lampasas cattle barn, was the center of activity during the cattle auctions. People would come from literally thousands of miles away to sell their cattle. And several of the guys that I went to high school with worked at the auction barn, and they would herd the sheep in, or they would herd the cows in, or they would herd the bulls in and move them through the chutes and into the trucks. And many of them rode rodeo, where they were competing on horseback. But as a new foal was born, or a new flock of sheep would come around, when these baby sheep would be put out to pasture, or when this new foal would be put out to pasture to learn to walk and graze on its own, there was always a donkey around. And I never could figure out why a donkey. Well, it turns out that if there's a donkey who's introduced early enough to the flock, whether it's a flock of sheep or small goats or even horses, when that donkey's introduced, it begins to bond as if it were one of the sheep or one of the horses. And for the most part, it becomes part of the family, part of the tribe, part of the flock. The difference is a sheep is not a defensible animal. A sheep in itself won't attack anything. I mean, don't get me wrong. I tried when I was about 12 to ride a male sheep, and it did not go well. Not even a little bit. My friend Scotty and I both ended up flat on our backs as the sheep ran away because we were acting like idiots. But sheep generally will not defend themselves against a predator like a coyote or a mountain lion. They need some other critter, some other animal, whether it's a sheepdog or it's a guard dog like a shepherd of some sort, maybe Australian shepherd, maybe a German shepherd, that will guard them against the predators like coyotes and mountain lions. But what we do know is that when you put that donkey in the flock, the donkey will defend its own territory. It will defend its own grazing rights against many predators. But it will also defend the sheep if a coyote or a mountain lion were to come into that area. Heaven forbid your family dog not be trained to protect the sheep and try to come after the sheep. If the Jenny is there, if that little donkey is there, that donkey will stomp that dog to death if you're not careful. Why? Well, because the donkey has a natural defense mechanism. It will bite, it will kick, and it can kick hard. It will stomp, it will chase, it will bray, it will make a lot of racket to let you know there's some kind of threat going on. In fact, if you're at home in the countryside and you hear a donkey braying a lot, chances are there's a predator nearby. That's what it's talking about. It's letting you know there's a threat. My question for you as a leader is, what have you installed in your team, in your tribe, in your flock? What individual or mechanism have you put into place to let you know, to alert you when a predator is there to maybe take your talent away, or a predator is there to get to your weakest link, your most vulnerable individual, the person most likely to be befriended by an outsider who's looking for, I don't know, classic espionage type information. someone who would ask the questions of business practices or internal policies or financial situations, that just wouldn't know any better or wouldn't have the wherewithal to say, that's not something I want to discuss with you. See, if we as leaders don't have these mechanisms in place, if we haven't thought far enough ahead to think, our organization, our team, our family unit could be at risk because there are outsiders who want to see us fail, then we're probably going to find ourselves in a place where we haven't prepared to fight off the vulnerabilities that we have. The challenge that we have as leaders is that we often have blinders on. We believe that if everything is clicking on all cylinders, if all of our teammates are solid, that they're doing their job well and they're loyal to the product and they're loyal to the process, that everything's going to be fine. We often don't want to admit that there are outsiders who want our organization to fail. We often don't want to admit that there are those who do not like our success. See, it's not just a thing within a small organization. We have to admit, on a national level, we have those who look at America as a threat to the rest of the world, as a stumbling block to the rest of the world being under one leadership. And for the most part, for close to 200 years, that's been true. America has been a bastion of freedom, of independence, of individual rights and individual responsibilities. And that nature of American value is different than many other places in the world. And there, as a result, are many nations in this world who would like to see our organization, our tribe, our family fail. Sometimes they do that simply by accusation, just making you ask the question, is that person really loyal to your team? Is that person really a benefit to your team? Well, the challenge is we as Americans tend to take that introspection much more harshly than many other countries throughout history have done. We ask ourselves those tough questions. Have we done it right? Could we have done it better? What have we done wrong? And as a country, we've addressed a lot of those ills. Now, there are still things that we need to perfect and clean up, but we don't have a Jenny right now. We don't have a donkey. We don't have anyone who's standing in the way to see those predators coming and alert us, hey, that's a predator. Those questions are not harmless. Those challenges are not, they're not inane. Those have a purpose behind them, and they are to underscore your failures until the failures become insurmountable. As a leader, we need to recognize when the threat is imminent. We need to recognize when the threat is there. And if we don't have a Jenny on the watch, if we don't have a little donkey who's out there in the midst of the tribe, out there in the midst of the flock saying, hang on, I see something that bugs me here. I have a question about why this is happening. If we don't have that in our culture, then predators will do their work. Predators will tear us up from the inside. I don't know if you've ever watched coyotes at work. Coyotes are not brave creatures. They're sometimes fearless, but they're not brave. And by that I mean they love to work in a mentality that says, I'm going to nip at you from this side, even though you might try to stomp at me or fight me off. My nipping is only about a distraction. I'm not really trying to win this war. I'm trying to distract you so that somebody else can attack you from the other side. And then they'll attack, and then they'll nip, and then they'll nip. And eventually we'll surround you until all together we can overwhelm you. Sound familiar? Yeah, see, it happens all the time in the forms of rhetoric. It happens all the time in marketing campaigns. It happens all the time in political campaigns. One attack isn't really meant to be anything, and so you swat at that mosquito, and then you realize that wasn't the real attack. The real attack is coming from behind, and by the time you turn around to that, now another attacker is coming from the other side. See, it's a pretty common tactic. Emotionally, relationally, verbally, in organizations, it's a common thing, and that's what a Jenny is for. The donkey will look at the attacker and say, I'm going to stomp a mud hole in you before you even get started. And I'm going to warn everybody else that you're not here alone and you're up to no good. And I'm going to do that in an extremely aggressive manner because these are my sheep. Leaders, if you don't have a donkey, if you don't have a Jenny in your organization, then it's you. You're the one responsible for letting people know when harm is coming. You're the one responsible for being alert enough to know there's danger in our midst. There are deceivers in our midst. There are liars in our midst. There are people trying to steal our secrets and steal our talent in our midst. And we need to let the world know that they're here. That's your job. That's your job as a leader. If you don't have a Jenny on your team, then that Jenny is you. And I challenge you as a leader to step up, to be alert, to be aware, to look for those little nip attacks from one side or the other, because if you're getting nipped on one side, you're about to get stabbed on the other. Be ready as a leader to be alert and to alert the team when a threat is imminent. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and